It's my first time, so I'd appreciate your patience. Tanya was a lovely girl from a respectable Christian home. She lived a good, God-fearing life from a young age. She was always mindful of her lifestyle choices. She was still a virgin at 23. It's been over 2 years since she left home to attend college and study medicine. Her mom gave her some final advice before she left. Tanya, my daughter, live a life that would please God and wait until you're married. She was always careful to avoid any situations where she might be taken advantage of or forced into sex. These words were her guiding principles. Whenever she was tempted, Tanya managed to stay pure for the first 2 years. But her outlook changed when she met Eric in her 3rd year. It was raining on that day, and she was stuck in class waiting for the rain to stop before heading home. While she was waiting, she noticed a restaurant across from her class. Eric was with his friends, enjoying a meal and drinks. Eric came from a well-off family. He was known at school for living a pretty extravagant lifestyle and for also having a bit of a reputation as a womanizer. He was very handsome, and girls were drawn to his charisma. He was the dream of every girl in school and beyond. As she waited for the rain to let up, it didn't. She got out into the rain, picking up the pace to get to her destination as quickly as possible. She was fine with the sound of her footsteps. She lost her footing on some slippery ground and fell pretty badly. Eric, who was at the restaurant with his friends, saw her and rushed to help. She was bleeding on her head, so they quickly got her into his car and drove to the hospital near their school. She was admitted, and Eric had to wait until she was well since he didn't know anyone in her life to contact. It was around 5:10 to 5:20 p.m. in the evening when Tanya opened her eyes to see Eric. "Hey, how are you doing?" he asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "Please, could you tell me what happened and where I am?" she continued. "You fell pretty hard and were out for a bit, so I had to take you to the hospital." "How much will this cost?" she asked. "Don't worry, it's already been taken care of," he told her. "Thanks for saving my life," Tanya said. "I'm ready to head over to my apartment." "I can give you a ride if you'd like," Eric said. "You've already done so much, and I don't want to add to your stress." She replied, "Okay, take care," and left the hospital. At that time, Tanya didn't know who Eric was or what he was known for. She finally got home, took a bath, and got some sleep the next day. Tanya had a test to write, so she quickly went over her notes before heading to school. While at school, she looked out for any sign of the kind man who'd helped her the day before. "I don't even know his name," she said to herself after the test. Tanya, who was known for her academic excellence, finished up early and left. As she was heading home, she saw Eric smoking with his friends in a hidden corner of the school. She was a little taken aback and picked up her pace to get around them without being noticed. She heard him from a distance and turned to see who it was. Eric had already approached her and started walking closer. "You're the girl from yesterday, right?" she said calmly. He asked. "Yes, I am." She replied, "I hope you're okay now." He went on, "I'm doing well." She replied, "Okay, take care." He said he was leaving, but she stopped him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tanya," she replied, breaking the silence. "Did you know that smokers are more likely to die young?" Eric asked. "Yes, I know," he replied, pausing for a moment. "I don't smoke all the time, though." "Why do you smoke at all?" Tanya asked. "I don't know," to which Eric replied with a smile. "Smoking gives me a kind of joy. No one can take that away from me." "You haven't tried everyone," he replied, smiling. "I hope you find someone who can give you the same kind of joy that smoking can't." Eric stood there, taken aback, as she walked away. "Who is this girl? I wonder why I haven't seen her around school before." He realized she wasn't impressed or intimidated by him. Eric made his way back to his colleagues. He wasn't interested in the marijuana they were smoking or anyone else. He couldn't stop thinking about Tanya. The rest of the day, Eric had a lot of questions on his mind. He was lost in thought, remembering his earlier conversation with Tanya. After a while, one of his colleagues noticed he was acting differently and asked him what was wrong. "What's up with you lately?" his colleague asked. "I'm not sure," Eric replied. "It's just that girl from the other day who we rushed to the hospital." "What about her?" his colleague asked. "I'm not sure," Eric said. "I'm right here trying to figure out why I'm thinking about her," Eric replied. "Oh boy, are you sure you aren't already in love? You know, they have a way of taking over your life." "I see," his colleague said, laughing. "She's just a different kind of person. I'd like to see her again." Eric asked his friend to help him look into everything he could about Tanya and get back to him. His friend didn't waste any time in sharing some key information about her. One day, Tanya was heading back from church when she saw Eric in his car, parked opposite the fellowship building. She was surprised to see him. "Hi," she said, smiling. "How have you been?" "It's good to see you without a cigarette today," she said with a smile. "I thought I'd ask if you'd like to go out to dinner with me," he said, smiling. "I haven't gone on a date with anyone before, and I don't plan to start now," she replied. "It's just a date, and it's harmless," he said, in a convincing tone. After some back and forth, Tanya agreed to go on a date with him. About an hour later, Eric came by her apartment to pick her up, and they went to a nice restaurant. "Is this place really worth the expense?" she asked. "No, it's fine. I've got this," he told her as they ate. Eric found himself staring at Tanya. He finally broke the silence by asking, "Are you always this reserved and calm?" "That's just the way I live my life," she replied calmly. "Do you often attend church?" she inquired. "I honestly can't remember when I last went to church," he replied, with his head bowed. "I don't think God loves me. I know I'm not one of his favorites." He went on, "Don't say that he loves us all and died for each and every one of us, because he loved us individually. He didn't die for us just because we're a big group. Even if you were the only person who had ever sinned, he still would have died for you." As Tanya spoke, Eric's eyes were fixed on her in awe. Where have I been all my life? He thought to himself. He couldn't stop thinking about her and was really impressed by her choice of words when she spoke next. They finished eating, and Eric drove her home and left. On his way back, he couldn't stop thinking about Tanya. She was driving him crazy. Could I really be in love? He wondered. But he didn't get any answers. The next day, Eric got a text from Tanya inviting him to a program at her church. He accepted right away and started getting ready to attend. The day of the program came, and Eric walked into the service while they were in the middle of a praise and worship session. He was in the choir. Eric was really impressed by Tanya's singing. He wasn't really paying attention to the worship, though. He was too busy looking at Tanya. After the service, Eric waited in the car park so he could give her a lift home. When Tanya walked over to his car, he smiled and said, "You were fantastic back there." "Thanks for the compliment." "Thanks. Just a second, let me get my bag," she replied as she rushed inside to get her bag. By this point, Eric was pretty sure he was in love with Tanya. He lost interest in other girls on campus because he was always thinking about Tanya. He was worried about telling Tanya how he felt because he didn't want her to start avoiding him. After a lot of thought, he finally mustered up the courage to tell her how he felt. As Tanya came back, they both got into the car and left. She asked how he felt now that he knew God loved him. Eric took a moment to collect his thoughts before replying, "I feel truly blessed." He got to her destination, and Tanya was about to open the door when he stopped her. "There's something I want to tell you," he said. "Okay, go ahead," she replied, looking into his eyes. "I'm hesitant to say it because I don't want to lose you," he continued. "You're already making me nervous with the way you're acting," she replied. Eric finally mustered up the courage to say, "Tanya, I think." Eric's heartfelt confession to Tanya gave her goosebumps, and she was speechless for over 2 minutes. This was the first time a guy had come out and said he loved her. She was experiencing a rush of emotion she wasn't used to. Eric asked her to say something. She apologized and said she had to go, then got out of his car and walked into her house. Eric was really disappointed because this was the first time a woman had rejected him. He went home and had a lot on his mind to think about. Tanya was in a similar situation. She thought about Eric, but it was really Eric who did most of the thinking. Tanya thought about what her mom had said and decided to give Eric some space. But there was still a part of her that wanted to get to know him better. She tried to resist, but she couldn't. The next day, Tanya was on her way to school when she ran into Eric. "I'm in a bit of a rush," she replied. "It'll just take a minute." He said he'd just take a minute, and she agreed. "Tanya," he said, "I know I'm not your ideal guy. I know I've made some mistakes in my life. I know I'm not in your world, but I'm really struggling to control my feelings for you. I know I can be better, and I want to be better for you. You're exactly what I need in my life. I'd really appreciate it if you could think about it. I love you." "You," he said. Tanya's heart was beating faster than ever before. She was at a loss for words. She was feeling numb. "Eric, I can't date you because I might not be able to give you the things you're used to." "I can make the necessary adjustments," Tanya said. "From what I've seen so far, I'm okay with it." "That's what you'd say now, but you'll have complaints later," he said. "I really have to go." "As you wish," Tanya said, as she walked away. Eric stood there, on the verge of tears, and finally mustered the courage to walk to his car while Tanya was in class. Tanya thought about Eric throughout the day. Should I give him a chance? She thought to herself. After class, Tanya's lecturer told her that she'd be happy to help mark some scripts in her office. She was there until about 6:15 p.m. 10 to 6. On her way home, she thought of Eric and decided to give him a call. "Hey," she said. "Hi," he replied. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm doing well," he replied. "Where are you?" she asked. "I'm just heading out of the office," he replied. "Can I come and get you?" she asked. "I'm at school now," he said. "Sure," she replied. She waited for him by the school gate, and he was there in no time. The car was quiet for a bit, then Eric broke the silence by asking how her day went. "I've been thinking about what we talked about earlier," she said. "Tanya, I'd like to get to know you better. I'd like your help in becoming the person you think I should be. I'm ready to work with you on this." "You have no idea what you're doing to me," he said, almost in tears. A few years later, she decided to give him a chance. "I like you, and I think we can work well together. Eric and I are willing to give it a shot," she said. Eric was over the moon. He was so happy he couldn't contain himself. He quickly drove to a nice restaurant, and they ate and talked. Eric was smitten with Tanya and eager to show her off. He gave up some bad habits and started going to church more often for over 3 months. Their relationship was going well until one rainy night when Tanya stopped by to see Eric. After cooking together, they ate and talked until it was time for dinner. Tanya was about to leave, but the rain was coming down pretty hard, so Eric decided to stick around. He joked that they could still get out in the rain and run to his car to drop her off. She said it was fine. Eric gave her some clothes to wear. They chatted and laughed for a while before Eric gave her a hug. As they hugged, T's heart started beating a little faster. "I love you, Tanya. Thanks for coming into my life," he said. "I love you too," she replied. Eric gave her a quick kiss on the forehead and then on the lips. T's body reacted with a chill as she returned the kiss. Eric was trying to be careful, but the atmosphere was already tense. He reached up and kissed her neck, then her shoulders. Tanya was overwhelmed with emotion. Before she could stop herself, Tanya reached out and kissed Eric's forehead, her lips still pressed against his neck. She was breathing quite heavily. Tanya held Eric's head in her hands and looked him in the eye. "I can't do this," she said. "Eric," she asked, "why?" Tanya's revelation about her virginity caught Eric off guard. He'd never thought a woman at her age would still be a virgin. He pulled out of her right away and looked at her with a bunch of different feelings, a mix of excitement and shock. "Are you serious?" he asked, sounding surprised. "Yes, I am," Tanya replied. "I'm sorry for coming this far. I didn't mean to." "No, it's okay. It wasn't like it wasn't consensual," she said. "Do you want to stay, or can we still make it to your place?" he asked. She ended up staying at his place, because it was already late for her to go. Eric gave her a kiss on the forehead and promised to wait until she was ready, even if it meant waiting until they got married. Tanya was impressed by how Eric handled the whole situation so maturely. That was when she knew he was the one for her. "I want you to be my first and only." She said it softly. Eric acted like he hadn't heard her and asked her to repeat it. "I want you to be my first and only." She repeated it. "I don't think we should, sweetheart," Eric replied. "I've been waiting a long time for this day. There's no one else I'd rather have by my side." She said it with confidence. "Look at me. Take a moment to look into my eyes. Just to be sure, are you sure you want this? I love you and feel the same way. But I can still wait if you want me to." He said, "Today's the day." She responded. Eric gave her a light kiss on the lips. "I'd make today a memorable one for you," he said as he laid her back on the bed. It looked like the rain was going to stick around for a while, too. Eric carefully removed her clothes and kissed her all over, as if his life depended on it. He gave her a gentle correction and squeezed her soft skin. Eric gave her the ride of her life, taking her to a wonderland of ecstasy. He made everything about her and not himself. Tanya let out a scream of delight and called his name. Once more, Tanya squeezed the pillows as she bit her lips, and the whole atmosphere was electric. Eric went to his wardrobe and got a box of protection items he used during his Playboy days. He picked one and went back to where Tanya was. "I'd like you to open this," he said. "Why me?" she asked. "I just need your final consent," he said. "If you open it by yourself, I'll know you're truly interested." He made sure her first experience was worthwhile. They ended up sleeping together after that, cuddling. The next day, Eric woke up and realized she wasn't next to him. He went into the living room and found her crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, but she didn't respond. "You're making me a bit nervous." "Please, what's the problem?" he asked, but she didn't respond. As Eric was getting frustrated, Tanya got up and left the room. Eric tried to grasp her hand, but she pushed his hands away. "Just stay away from me," she said as she left. Eric was at a loss. He'd messed up, but he couldn't figure out what. Tanya was really upset. When she got home, she burst into tears. "What have I done?" she asked, sounding distressed. "I guess God probably hates me and would never forgive me." She didn't go to school or attend fellowship for over a week. She locked herself in her room and turned off her phone. She didn't want to see anyone for a while. She was so upset that she almost fell sick. Eric was on edge all day. Despite visiting Tanya over 100 times, Eric was unable to gain access to her or see her. He was going crazy and regretted ever having sex with Tanya's pastor, and other church members were concerned and came looking for her, but they couldn't get in touch with her either. She locked the doors and didn't respond to anyone who knocked. She kept saying, "God hates me." After about a week of staying indoors, she picked up her phone and called her mom. "Hello, Mama," she said, greeting her mom, who was in tears. "How are you, my daughter? I've been trying to call your line." "I've been trying to call her since yesterday, but it isn't going through." Her mom said, "I'm really sorry." She said it in a shaky voice. "Are you okay, my dear?" her mom asked. She took a moment to collect herself and said, "I have something to tell you, Mama. Please don't be upset with me." Her mom had a feeling about what it was. The issue might be. Tanya finally said, "Mom, I've lost my virginity." Tanya delivered the unfortunate news to her mom, and there was silence at the other end of the line. Her mom was pretty upset and couldn't say anything to Tanya, who kept. "Mom, are you still there? If you could just say something, that would be great," Tanya asked, in a pleading tone. "Why didn't you wait until you got married? I did everything I could to ensure you grew up serving God. Why did you choose to repay me this way?" her mom said sadly. Tanya felt even more disappointed in herself as her mom's words made things worse. "I don't have anything to say to you on this matter. This is between you and God," her mom said, ending the call. Tanya got lost in her thoughts and started to cry. "What should I do, Lord? Is there anyone there? You still there? Do you still love me?" she thought to herself. The next day, she found the courage to go to class, having missed a lot on her way to work. She ran into Eric. "Can we talk?" he asked. "No," she replied. "What's going on with you? What have I done to deserve this treatment from you?" he asked, almost in tears. But Tanya didn't respond as she walked away. Eric was really upset and got into his car, slammed the door, and drove off, leaving his friends behind. They later discovered him at a bar. They tried to take him home, but he was drunk and wouldn't go. "Why are you making things difficult for yourself?" they asked. "You should just leave me alone," he replied, almost in tears. "I told you not to get involved with that woman, but you didn't listen. Now you're facing the consequences." His friend said Eric couldn't talk further because he was so upset, repeating, "I love her. She's the first girl I've ever truly loved, and now she doesn't even want to see me." After about a week of sobriety, his friends tried to console him and drove him to his car, then to his house. Eric reverted to his previous habits. This time it was worse than before. He was more promiscuous and seemed to have lost all emotional control. He was out at clubs late at night, and he always came back with a different woman. He relocated from his previous residence to a larger apartment complex, where he could live among other affluent students. He was careless with his finances. He was also spending a lot more money on his parents' money, doubling his already lavish lifestyle at this time. Tanya was feeling better and started to miss Eric. She felt bad about how she handled the whole virginity situation and felt she owed Eric an apology. I miss him, she thought to herself. I was foolish and childish to behave the way I did. After thinking it over, she picked up her phone to call Eric, but he wasn't available. She tried his other number, but it was the same story. She hadn't been told he'd changed his number. She went to his house to look for him, but he'd moved out. Tanya was starting to panic because she didn't know what to do next. She was completely in the dark about what was going on. She looked for him in all the places she thought he might be, but couldn't find him. Tanya was starting to feel a bit panicky. She was at a loss as to what else to do. I can't afford to lose Eric. I love him, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. After a fruitless search, she was walking back home. When she ran into one of Eric's friends, Daniel, she said, "Hey, Daniel. How have you been?" "I've been good," he replied, sounding a bit bored. "Please. I've been trying to find Eric, but I haven't had any luck. Do you have any idea where he is?" "What did I do?" she asked. He seemed distressed and appeared to be under the influence of alcohol. His thought process was a bit muddled, and he was having trouble thinking clearly. This was a direct result of the way she had treated him. "Could I just see him, please?" she asked. "I'm on my way to his house now." "Let's go together," he replied. She was really happy, thinking that she would see Eric soon. When they got to his place, Tanya had to wait in the living room while his friend went to let Eric know she was there. Daniel walked into Eric's room and saw two girls lying on his bed. He wasn't sure how to break the news to Eric. Tanya was waiting in the living room. "Hey Daniel, how are you doing?" Eric said hello. "Can we talk in private for a moment?" Daniel asked. "Please say what you want to say here." "I'm a bit tied up at the moment," Eric said, laughing. Daniel finally mustered up the courage to say, "Tanya is in the living room." The news that Tanya was waiting in the living room came as a shock to Eric, so much so that he had to ask Daniel to repeat himself. He didn't want to believe that the only girl he ever loved, whom he was trying so hard to forget, was sitting in his parlor. "How did she find out where I live?" "Who brought her here?" he asked, sounding annoyed. "I did," Daniel replied. "Why didn't you let me know first, Eric?" Daniel replied, "It was a last-minute thing. She saw me at school and said she'd been looking for you, so I had to bring her here." Eric was at a loss as to how to handle this situation and unsure of how to approach Tanya or what to say to her. He said, "Tell her to leave." Daniel had to convince him, but Eric finally agreed to meet with Tanya. He asked the girls to wait in his room and not to come into the living room. As he made his way down the corridor to the living room, he was feeling a bit nervous. When he saw Tanya, he felt a rush of emotions. He tried to keep his emotions in check, but his heart was beating a mile a minute as she greeted him. "Hey," he replied, sitting on a different couch. "You've relocated," she said. "Nothing," he replied. "Okay, so how have you been?" she asked. "I'm doing well," he replied. Tanya was getting frustrated with Eric's approach to communication was that she was the only one asking questions. She asked, "Can we talk about us?" He replied, "There's nothing to discuss. I could have handled everything better. It wasn't your fault, and I'm sorry for the long delay in getting back to you." Eric was quiet for a couple of minutes and then said, "It's all good. So, where do we go from here? Are we still on? I don't think I can get you out of my mind." "I think it's time you leave," he said as he stood up from where he was sitting. Tanya was feeling pretty devastated and pretty broken-hearted. "Oh my, I really don't want to lose Eric. I do have feelings for him. I have to tell him," she thought to herself as she stood up from where she was sitting and was about to tell Eric how much she loved him and didn't want to lose him. The two girls walked through the corridor, one of them gave Eric a kiss, and they both said goodbye as they left his house. Tanya was taken aback. She looked at Eric, who was speechless. "I'm really happy to see how much I meant to you. I'm sorry you couldn't wait a little while before replacing me," she said. "You replaced me a little while ago," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. At this point, Eric was touched and wanted to let her know how much he cared about her and that those girls meant nothing to him. However, he was at a loss for words. "I'm out of here, and just so you know, I really cared about you," she said, walking away. He was so angry that he immediately went to see Daniel. "Why did you let those girls come into the parlor when you knew they weren't supposed to be there?" he asked, visibly upset. "I tried to stop them, but they said they had to leave because you were taking too long." He went to a party he'd been invited to earlier. Lots of women approached him to chat. He tried to keep his mind occupied to avoid dwelling on what had happened at home. The more he tried to move on from Tanya, the more he found himself thinking about her. Eric was really struggling. He couldn't stop thinking about Tanya. On the way home from the party, Tanya was in tears. She was really upset. She was surprised that Eric could move on so quickly. It was really tough on her. She was aware that he was the one who took her virginity. "Am I ever going to be able to move on from him?" Tanya thought to herself. She tried to move on, just like Eric, but it seemed to take them about a week to get back into the swing of things. Tanya had to work on a project with a male classmate, so she stayed back after class until evening. After they finished the project, they walked home together since they lived close to each other. Meanwhile, Eric was consumed by jealousy. Why was he even bothered by it? He tried to ignore it, but he just couldn't. He went over to them and told Tanya she didn't need to walk with the guy she was with. "Can I have a quick word with you?" he asked. Tanya looked into his eyes, and her heart started to beat faster. "Sure, why not?" she replied. "Can we sit in my car?" he asked. "Sure, why not?" she replied. They got into the car and sat in silence. Eric kept looking at Tanya, whose head was down. "I was really struggling because you weren't willing to talk to me," he said. "I tried to keep it together, but the more I tried, the more I fell apart. I had no other choice but to go back to the things that could help fill the gap you left open. You're the first girl I've ever truly loved." "You really hurt me," he said, with tears in his eyes. Tanya was unable to hold it together and began to cry. "Why did you decide to go back to your old way of life?" "I was taken aback when I saw those girls in your house." She said, her eyes welling up with tears, "You have to decide which path you want to take and stick to it. I want you to change because you're truly committed to it, not because of me. If you do that, you'll be able to stick to your decision even if I don't always set the best example. I love you probably more than you love me because I want to save your soul and help you become a better person," she said as she opened the door and got down. "Where are you going?" Eric asked in a quiet voice. "I'm going to a vigil later tonight, so I need to leave," she replied as she closed the door. As soon as Tanya got home, she got ready for the night vigil at her church. When she arrived at the church, she joined the choir to rehearse the song they would sing. Eric came and sat in the back corner. The service started, and Tanya sang a song that really moved her. Eric was so moved that he started to tear up. The pastor then invited anyone who wanted to accept Christ into their lives to do so. Tanya was still lost in worship and didn't notice that Eric was kneeling in front of the altar. When she finished singing, she lay on the floor and broke into tears, silently praying for Eric in her heart. The pastor asked those who came forward to say the salvation prayer again. Tanya kept hearing a familiar voice urging her to repeat the salvation prayer. She tried to tune it out, but the voice wouldn't stop. At last, she got up to get some answers. Much to her surprise, it was Eric. She was amazed. When she saw Eric kneeling at the altar, she was surprised and pleased. Joy knew no bounds and was impossible to contain. Eric was about to make one of the biggest decisions of his life, and she was really happy to be there to support him. "Thank you, Lord," she thought. "You really do have a way of keeping us on our toes." She got up from where she was lying and went back to the choir stand after the pastor finished. With the salvation prayer, he welcomed the new members to their new family in Christ and sent them off to their seats. Tanya was smiling all the way through the service. She was really looking forward to seeing Eric afterwards. After the service, Eric stayed in his seat and bowed his head. He was thinking about his past and all the mistakes he'd made. He was amazed that God could love someone like him. Eric was still thinking things over when Tanya came up to him and touched his shoulder. "How are you holding up?" she asked, looking into his eyes. "I've never been better," he replied. Tanya couldn't help but smile and invite him to stand up so they could head home. It was already past 5 o'clock. It's 12 a.m. on the way home, and Tanya is thinking about giving Eric a second chance, but she's not sure how to start the conversation. They finally arrived at Tanya's house, and Eric turned off the car. Can we chat before you head out? He asked. Sure, we can, Tanya replied. Eric took a deep breath and said, thanks for loving me for who I am, even when no one else did. I appreciate you showing me the way out of the darkness when I was stuck in a rut. I'm grateful for the day I met you and would love to have you back in my life. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I promise I'll never let go of your hand again. For the first time in my life, I know what I want, and that's you. He said, with tears in his eyes. Tanya was really moved at that moment and looked at Eric and said, you're my treasure. I never thought I could love anyone else the way I love you. You showed me a whole new side of God's love. I never thought that was possible. I used to think that God's love was conditional, but my journey with you has made me realize that even though things didn't work out the way we hoped, I want to thank you for being there for me, Eric. I know I told you I was a virgin, but I guess I wasn't really. I'm sorry for taking your virginity. I could have stopped you, even though you wanted it. I'm sorry for putting you through this. I'm sorry for making you wait. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm sorry for putting you 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 through this. I'm talking about the man who would take God's place as the bridegroom, Tanya said, her eyes brimming with tears. Eric was taken aback as he looked at Tanya. He couldn't stop thinking about what made her so special. I'd be honored to make you my wife someday. I'm willing to wait until our wedding night before I touch you again, he said, looking into Tanya's eyes after their intimate conversation. Tanya got out of Eric's car and said her goodbyes. She went into her house and bowed her head to give thanks for all that had happened. She slept like a baby all night, knowing that she was back together with the one man she'd always loved. Eric was the same. The days turned to months, and the months turned to years. Eric finished his degree program while Tanya was still working on hers. Tanya was there on the day of Eric's graduation, and he was pleased to see him graduate with honors. He got a second-class upper, and Tanya was surprised to find out that he'd already planned with the organizers to give a speech at the graduation. The ceremony continued, and Eric was asked to give his speech. After posing for a few pictures with the rector, Eric picked up the microphone and got started. I felt like I was lost and no one seemed to care to find me until you came along. I'm at a loss for words today if I were to try to list everything I'm thankful for. I'm a graduate with good grades today because of 3 people. I'm grateful to God, the excellent professors, and you, Tanya. I love you, and that's why I'm asking you, in front of everyone, to marry me. Would you consider it? Eric got down on one knee and popped the question. Tanya was so surprised that she almost fainted. She made her way over to the pulpit, and everyone in the hall applauded as she passed by. She went over to Eric and looked into his eyes, smiling. She replied, "Absolutely. I'm thrilled. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. We hope you enjoy the story. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions in the comments section. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. If you're new here, don't forget to like and share. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can stay up to date. You can also show your support by joining our membership community. Your support will help us create more engaging videos and support a few people in our community who need financial assistance. Stay positive and don't give up on your goals. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next video.